Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, this is the second plenary session of the MOOCs for Development, and it's entitled The MOOCs for Development Potential at the Bottom of the Pyramid, International MOOCs and International Development. So as you see, we have immediately after the sessions of this morning, which introduced the topics of the conference, the general topic of the conference, we are moving into a specific aspect of the use of MOOCs, and that aspect leads to international development, and international development, of course, leads to issues that relate to the privileged, that relate to issues of access for them, that relates also to one of the probably important aspects of this conference, namely using the MOOCs for education for all. Because as all of you know, as far as the beginning of the MOOCs, it was really focused on, the MOOCs were focused on post-secondary education, which is really tertiary education. But when we talk about at least a good part of the world in the international part of development that we are going to look at, it's clear that the issues are going to be relating to education for all, and therefore issues of access, of cost, and what have you. So we have a panel who will hopefully direct their attention to those issues, who will try to answer questions on how to use the MOOCs to improve social, economic health and social outcomes, to improve access and inclusion, to expand capacity, to, in a way, make way for education for everybody. So those are the questions and the buzzwords of this afternoon. The three members of our panel are Papa Youga Dieng, who is from the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, OIF, and the coordinator of the Francophonie initiative in training at a distance. The second is Sandra Klopper, who is a Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Cape Town, South Africa, who has been responsible for teaching and learning, institutional planning, and a variety of other topics related to information and communication technology services. So the third person is Duggan, who is the Director of Worldwide Education Strategy at Microsoft Corporation. So this panel is diversified. It's really covering three important facets of MOOCs and other technologies, related technologies, and work, therefore, in education and in promoting education for all. I'm going to ask each of the members of this panel to keep to the time that we are allocating for this. And I think the most important part of this plenary is to enable you to interact with them. Therefore, we will try to have as much time as possible to see how we can get the maximum questions, and maybe at probably half time, after going through some of the questions, we can see how we can help you reorganize in smaller groups and continue the discussion until the coffee hour. So I ask, therefore, Mr. Dieng to speak.
Merci. Je voudrais remercier l'Université de Pennsylvanie et le professeur Dan d'avoir associé l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie à ces travaux. Don't worry, I will do it in French. In French should be more comfortable for me, but I will do it in English. And in my presentation, I will talk quickly about Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. And then I will show you some projects about open education and resources. And after then, we will look at the perspectives for MOOC for development in Francophonie and some recommendations. The organization was created 1970, and its mission is to embody the active solidarity between the member states in order to work for the development of each other. And the member states are not only French-speaking countries, they are countries from other areas in the world. And the member states are all around the world. The organization makes multilateral cooperation, and it has operators. In them you have Association Universitaire, Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, and the president is here. And you have TV5, l'Université de Senghor et l'Association Internationale des Maires Francophones, and the OIF. All these organizations work together to implement the strategic plan of the Francophonie. And we finish now the strategic plan, and the main element interesting us in the strategic plan is the support of education, the professional development of teachers, and higher education and research. In OIF, we focus on quality of basic education, teaching French in multilingual environment. And what we will talk about now is around professional development of teachers. Because if you look at the main problem now in educational system is the skills of teachers. And we will come again about that. But I will talk to you about different projects we implement around OER. After UNESCO, we developed a strategic plan for OER and an action plan in Francophonie in which we support the development of OER in different forms and in the projects. The Francophonie decided to publish into a Creative Commons license all resources produced in our educational projects. And the first one is IFADEM, the project I coordinate, who is present in more than 10 countries in Africa and in Haiti. This project aims to build the capacity of teachers in the subjects they teach. And we focus on teachers in rural areas. And you may understand that in rural areas we don't have connectivity, we don't have energy. And the main element we use is the paper, is booklets with papers. But these booklets are published under Creative Commons license. But we develop a website in which all that resources can be downloaded for free. And also in the website we have a Moodle environment for those who have access to internet. In Senegal, there is another project that I started in 2002 who delivers content for pupils, teachers, and parents around for secondary and primary school. And this website is very interesting because early it works around the spirit of MOOCs, because it was courses or part of courses who was published And the users can go to the website and to ask a question, and when they ask a question, you have teachers who can respond to that question. And the question was around the subjects or around, for example, the orientation. For example, parents can discuss with his kids what he will do after the secondary school, and they may have problem, and we had some question around that. It was a big socialization around that project, and that project won a World Summit Award in 2007. The third one is more actual, is the MOOC that University of Moncton and National Research Council of Canada are leading, and Mr. Robert Gregoire and Stephen Downs are here, and if you want to know more about this project, you can ask them. But we are very interested to that because that project works to expand the use of open education resources in Francophone area. And it is a CMOOC in which all participants come and contribute to the development of the content. And the teachers who work on this project are from everywhere in the Francophonie. It is running, but we expect to finish it in a few weeks and to make a research to see the impact of the project. One important thing of this project is that project generates also contents, many contents about open educational resources. And we can have some elements that we learn in examen.sn, because when we started it in 2002, there are some persons who download the website, and they organize the content and they sell it into the schools. And the members of our team who work on this project was offended. But when we analyzed the situation, we decided to encourage to do it, because those people, rich people we can reach by using internet, and they make a transformation of what we do to reach other people. And our objective, our main objective, was to reach the largest people possible. And we can expect that in the MOOC, all people don't have access to internet, and the need of training is very high in the secondary education or in the primary education. And we have many challenges. The biggest one is the shortage of qualified teachers, because it is an obstacle to reach the education for all objectives. And in many African countries, 40% to 60% of teachers are not trained or are not very well trained. And there is a strong need of training. The other problem is the problem that many of presenters talk about, is the access to energy or to internet is very low in many countries. In many countries you have access to internet or to energy in the cities, but when you go to the rural area, you don't have access to energy or internet. And in many African countries or less developed countries, the most important number of teachers are in rural area. And there is a question how we can use the MOOC in order to reach those people who don't have access. It's a question. But we think also that it's very important that we can use the MOOC for those who have access for professional development, or to use the MOOC to expand knowledge around cross-cutting issues like open education resources, like we did with University of Moncton, or for example, education for sustainable development. There is cost-cutting issues that we think that the MOOC is very efficient for that, because for the MOOC you can mobilize many people who have knowledge around different areas, and they can work together around a training program. The other aspect is the tentative of response to how the MOOCs can help to reach those people who don't have access to the technology. Maybe the response can be found in examen.sn, in which for the MOOC, when the MOOC is running, content is generated, and that content could be organized and disseminated under different forms, paper or video or sound. We think that the MOOC can help in this field. And I will finish to later to talk about importance of increasing access to the technology, because everybody talking about the digital gap, but it is here, still here. And it's very important that people, even there in rural area, that effort be made to them, more efforts to them to have access to energy or internet. And the project internet.org I saw is a very good project, and because it aims to give access to people who don't have access to internet. And also to build the capacity of people who are in the university and training institution for teachers. I think it's very important to have a MOOC running in, because when I talk about, not about developed country, the other country. They have to participate efficiently in the world. To do that, they need to be trained. And also, we talk about mobile technology and alternative sources of energy. They can be used in order to increase the access to MOOCs. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. You got well within the time of the conference, and I hope that we have many questions for you to answer when we get there. Sandra Klopper is going to follow with her own presentation.
It's not but it. Thank you all, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I have found it really fascinating today, and I'm sure it will continue to be fascinating as we go along. I'd like to say, just as a start, that I have been very fascinated so far by the overlaps and synergies and complementarity of the presentations that we've all heard. And I think it says something about how we understand from different perspectives the landscape that we find ourselves in. The other thing that I want to say is that it's rather presumptuous for me to be talking about MOOCs and development perspectives from higher education in Africa, given my knowledge of African institutions. And I do want to, as a disclaimer, indicate that I have a good knowledge of Anglophone Africa, but certainly not a Francophone Africa. My connections are primarily with Uganda, Makerere, with Dar es Salaam, and with Legon in Ghana. I'm also an active member of the Association of African Universities, and I went to the Association of African Universities conference last year in Gabon in 2013. And what I just want to say about that experience is, and I don't know if any other Africans were there, that the entire conference was on employability. And I don't think, as recognized as a major challenge for Africa, and I don't think there was any mention at any stage in that conference on online education, let alone MOOCs. But then I wasn't able to attend all the sessions. So it gives you an idea of just the different challenges and the different perspectives that people bring to bear in these situations. Now I have to figure out how to... there we are. All right, one of the things that I think has come up already and which is very interesting is that Africans are consumers rather than producers of MOOCs. And if you look at the landscape here of where MOOCs have been moving and being produced over a short period, here we are in the extension from effectively North America and Europe and Australia, and some extension over there. The question is what's actually happening in Africa itself. As I said, we are primarily consumers rather than producers of MOOCs, and it's quite interesting that I've heard this morning, like my own university, we are slowly getting into that landscape of also being in the production side of MOOCs, and I'll come back to that shortly. I would like to raise here the implications that that has for us, that to some extent what is happening in certain situations is that from countries like Africa, people are providing incredible source material as case studies that go into other people's MOOCs, and then they don't actually have ownership of that material. And I think this is something that we do need to think about. Here with Coursera's MOOC participation, you can see most recently how low it is, in fact, in Africa, in spite of what we've heard of the attempts to use MOOCs as part of education in Africa, and also to use MOOCs particularly in a wrapped form. Now, at my institution, we are in fact using MOOCs in wrapped form, and here are just a few examples of the kinds of MOOCs that we have accessed and are using: critical thinking and global challenges, principles of writing English, understanding research, model thinking, design and interpretation of clinical trials, data analysis, and university teaching. So these are very sort of skills-based MOOCs that my university is beginning to use as part of a wrapped attempt at engaging what is actually out there. That said, if we're looking at the issue of MOOCs and development challenges in Africa, my sense is, from the perspective that I come from at the University of Cape Town, that we're dealing with three competing markets, and this is something that has already come up. I believe that if we are going to enter the area of MOOCs production as opposed to consumption, that we need to showcase African knowledge and expertise, so that we look at our own niche areas, and I'll come back to this very briefly. However, for me a very big question is, and I think it's something that we really need to grapple with in Africa, whether the issue of MOOCs is really should really be our primary concern, because there are other resource issues that are really, really important for the continent. For example, the resourcing of social and economic development initiatives in Africa, and I'll come back to them. And also in the local and the national context for us in South Africa, and I think that applies to other African countries as well, the need to narrow the gap between the secondary and tertiary institutions, and what some people have called the college readiness and bridging courses that need to be put in place. And again, this is something that has come up repeatedly so far here. So, speaking from our own institution, the University of Cape Town, its educational mission really fits precisely those three areas that I referred to above. We have a pro-vice chancellor in poverty and inequality, another one in climate change. These are areas where I think we can make very meaningful interventions from the African perspective as far as the development of MOOCs are concerned. We also have a commitment to improving the transition from school to university, a major project that we have in place as far as that is concerned. And speaking to Dan just before we came to the session, I mentioned to him in passing that our university has just passed an open access policy. And he said, you must tell us that. It took 18 months of very hard work through many committees to get it through our Senate and eventually to our Council. But we have that open access policy, and I think that the more institutions that do this, and that don't do it in a sort of ad hoc way, which I think is happening too much, the more likely we are to get commitment to open education resources internationally. Right. The obvious thing, and it's been referred to in passing by many people, is that if African institutions are to develop MOOCs, what are the resource implications? And I think we have seen from the early starters in this area that the resource implications are absolutely massive, both in terms of human resource implications and, of course, the technology development that is required for it. I've just downloaded here something to do with the preparation of MOOCs at London University. You can see the extraordinary amount of energy, obviously, that went into it. And those of you who have developed MOOCs know that it takes a huge amount of resources. And it also takes professional production staff, high-quality video content, pedagogical and other issues, including copyright, that has to be looked at. So it's an onerous undertaking, and it's a particularly onerous undertaking in the African context where resources are very limited. In my university, we are very lucky to have a Center for Higher Education Development, but that center is also under-resourced in terms of the ideas we are trying to begin to develop around MOOCs. And then, of course, governance and strategy. Just this one example where a MOOC Strategy Advisory Committee that was established in April 2013 has met almost on a weekly basis. And I suspect, I don't know this, I suspect that where there is a large investment in MOOCs and institutions, this is the kind of resourcing that you need in order to really get into the market. That said, finally, the University of Cape Town is now beginning to look at developing MOOCs with an African focus, one on statistics that is African inflected, another one on medical humanities. And it is interesting the extent to which the large companies are actually wooing institutions in Africa. I discovered this morning that Mark Lester from FutureLearn has figured out how to put meetings in my electronic diary from England to Philadelphia via Cape Town as an indication of the kind of pressure that African institutions are also under to, in a sense, join this community. And I think for very good reasons in some respects, but I don't want to go into that. But I think there are other challenges, much more important challenges as well. So the question for me is, from the perspective of my own institution, what do we need to do to achieve the greatest impact in and for Africa? And I don't think it's the MOOCs area, actually. I think there are other much more challenging issues for us. And it's in the area of grayness between open content MOOCs and online learning. It's in the areas of development, and particularly in the area of development for younger learners, not for tertiary school learners. But I'll come back to that as my final major contribution here. I just want to say that as far as resource and development initiatives in Africa, it's very interesting what is happening with wrapped MOOCs. That at Makerere University, for example, as indicated here, and also at Dar es Salaam, there is some very interesting open education resources and MOOC material that is being used for ICT development. So I have another minute to say that, as I indicated, I think the important thing for us is to know how to narrow the gap between secondary and tertiary education. In our country, 50% of first-time entering students in South Africa fail to complete their degrees. They don't have adequate career advice. It's one of the major reasons why they don't succeed to get through. It's because they don't know what they don't know, because they're first-time entering university students. They have threshold concepts as stumbling blocks for success, and they are unable, or in many cases, to understand the requirements and constraints of the tertiary environment. So I think these are, I'll skip this slide, I think these are students that we need to be targeting. And we need to be targeting them in a way that they get this sense that they have taught themselves. I think empowerment is a key to success. We need to build resilience and self-reliance, to foster a sense of agency and ownership, provide adequate scaffolding and embed digital and other literacies in content that we give to those students so that they learn without knowing what they're learning, additionally to the content that they are getting. And I think it's very important for us to begin to offer short 3-week interventions with the aid of teachers as facilitators. This, to me, I think is a key way of addressing the skills shortage in Africa. And there are many existing resources that we can use in order to assist us with making this kind of achieving this kind of development in the African context. Thank you.
We have reached now our third contributor, Mr. Stephen Duggan from Microsoft. Is going to tell us about the World Education Program.
Thank you, and excuse me, being a technical person for a technical company, that means that almost inevitably I'll be the person experiencing the technical breakdown, and it tends to happen. If you give me 1 second just to hook up the monitor. This would not be the first time this didn't work.
It's good.
That was like a slightly ironic cheer. Perfectly understand. Oh my God. Right. So, hello, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Duggan. I work in Microsoft as part of a small group within our corporation focused on education policy, practice and pedagogy. And I think we're at a really interesting point in time. You know, the conference today, dealing with MOOCs, what we've heard from Sandra, from Klopper, in terms of the advancements being made in delivery of learning to that bottom part of the pyramid, is really exciting. We're also at a point where we're beginning to get from this notion of what is personalised learning towards how do we deliver personalised learning. And I found that really exciting. First of all, as a parent, I actually have 6 children. I have kids, 3 boys, 3 girls, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. Their mother's very organised, as you have to be if you have 6 children, ranging in age from 19 down to 4. But also, I find it exciting as a teacher. I joined Microsoft straight out of the classroom. I was a head of English in a series of secondary schools in Ireland, working in various parts of it. And now in my job, I get to do something really interesting. I get to go travel around the world and visit lots of different schools. A good game to play around now is spot the happy face. Because what I find actually going from place to place is I'm not struck by the differences. I'm struck by the similarities. So although the class, the pupil-teacher ratios may change, or the quality of the equipment may change, as we're seeing a theme here, really we're seeing much the same thing. There hasn't been a revolution in education in the way that many of us within the profession were promised. It doesn't really matter where you go. In fact, it's small wonder that when we ask children, as a recent survey did in 2012, do you like school? Really simple question. What we find is, year in, year out, they like it less. And then we hit this interesting little spot where it starts to go up again. The reason it starts to go up again is that a lot of the children who don't like school leave it. So now we're only the polling those who have decided to stay. So the reality is that the current modalities are failing everyone. They're not just failing the students, they're failing parents. Ask parents here in the US about student debt. They're failing employers, we're not finding the skills. They're failing communities around the world. They're failing entire nations and economies. And we recognize that there's a need for change. But when we look at that change, technology is a sort of a bright beacon, but we need to be careful about it. You know, one of the things we have found, for example, is the way in which technology can scale. Khan Academy is a fascinating example of this. The most fascinating statistic Sal Khan gave when he came to speak to us recently is not that he has reached 216 million students, but that he's done it with 36 teachers. Think of that. The ability of technology to extend the reach of a great educator without concerns about time and place. I find that fascinating. Well, what we don't want to end up with is this. This is not better. This is just the same. And as Michael Fullan has said, talking about MOOCs and other opportunities to provide greater access to content, access is not enough because the ability to learn does not just appear with the opportunity. If it did, the internet would have made us all geniuses and probably would have put everyone in this room out of a job, myself included. So pedagogy is really important. And in fact, when we talk about this notion of deep learning, we've actually arrived at a stage where we now know what we mean by 21st century skills. We know that that involves the ability to collaborate, it involves the ability to problem solve, it involves communication skills, but it also means concern and ability to express your view of the world and to engage with world issues. And that's something which is transcending all socioeconomic barriers. We also know what we mean when we talk about deep learning as an experience. We know the sort of experience we want to show, but as a teacher I was always asked to show rather than tell. So I'm going to cross my fingers that the technology is going to work, and I'm going to show you a very short video. But I'd like you to look at two things in this. One is, look at what the teachers and the students are doing, the role of teachers and students in this demonstration, in this learning activity. And secondly, just look at the faces of the children.
In my classroom, I'll grasp onto any technology that can expand the kids' possibilities. Greeter, come on up. Learning comes from a teacher that's willing to take a risk and do something new and bring in these powerful tools.
Hi, welcome to Mystery Skype.
One of the key tools we're using right now is Skype to connect with other classrooms. It's so powerful to connect them beyond these four walls.
Are you in the United States?
Mystery Skype's a chance for the kids to connect with other students around the world.
Are you east of Mississippi?
Runners, if
No.
It's a challenging game for them. They have to critically think.
It helps the kids understand other cultures and other countries.
Are you in the U.S.? No, we're not. Are you somewhere in Mexico? Yes.
It's a powerful tool to see kids learning from each other. Hey, Mateo, come on over, bring those maps. To see their critical thinking process is far better than any test I can give them.
Because of Mr. Begley, learning seems to be really fun. It's more like a game instead of the teacher telling you this is what we're going to be doing.
It's a team effort to really win Mystery Skype. Do the Rocky Mountains run through your state? No.
I mean, really, it takes a team to do anything in life. And this is a chance for them to experience that collaboration.
Are you in Baja, California?
You can see those light bulbs going off and just that connection that they're making. How better to do that than to actually connect with other kids all over the world?
Do you have dry weather?
Yes, we do have.
Technology empowers our class to be enabled to learn beyond our four walls. I'm just a passionate educator who wants to make an impact for kids. I'll take risks to try to expand their learning beyond what they could have ever imagined.
Are you in Mexico City?
Yes, we are.
So what you'll have noticed is that the technology is really simple, and it doesn't begin with the technology. That's a learning exercise driven by great pedagogy. Because teaching and learning have always been about the same three pillars: relationships between and among teachers and students, the practices, and the measurements at the back. And the measurements are key. I think when we look at the promise of MOOCs, we have to realize that new forms of learning need new forms of measurement if we're actually going to achieve progress. So we're involved in a number of really interesting projects. One of them is a worldwide project called New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, which involves 1,000 schools from all over the globe who are looking to find ways of bringing about systemic change by bringing about new ways of using technology to support great teaching and learning. So the role of technology in education is not a black and white one, except sometimes it is. So I want to change a little and just talk about a separate issue. One of the things we did in our group is we spent around a year asking educators and organisations such as UNESCO, what are the big challenges? Where should a company like Microsoft seek to add help? And what immediately became apparent is that literacy is the #1 educational challenge facing the world. You know, we know what literacy changes, all these things on the left. We know that increased literacy levels increase the levels of maternal health, we know that it decreases conflict, etc. We also know what we need for literacy. We need these things. We need books, we need people who can read those books to learners, we need access to tools and instruction and assessment. But the challenge is huge. There's 765 million illiterate adults on the planet. That's 1 in 4 adults on the planet. There are 7,000 languages on the planet, and 95% of those languages are spoken by less than 100,000 people. This is not a challenge that is going to be addressed by mainstream publishers. It doesn't make sense economically. We need to find another way of supporting this variety of languages. We know, and I find this really scary, that of the 56 million children out of school today, 49% of them will never go to school. They never spend a single day in a classroom. So we need to work fast to try and find ways in which we can deal with this. And we also know a very frightening statistic, that almost a third of illiterate learners live in illiterate homes. Think what that means. If we provide those children with a printed book, we might as well give them a brick. It has no use to them when they go back to home if there's not somebody else within that home or the community who can read it to them. So looking at that challenge, one of the things we've tried to do is engage with a group of experts from the NGO community, leadership again from UNESCO, and say, what can we as a technology company do? And one of the things we've done is we've created a set of tools. These are free tools which are available. I'll just go back briefly to the website, and this website called litforlife.net, which allows anybody, anywhere, in any language to create a book for free. You can go to this website and the tools are there to allow anybody to create a book for free. But not only will that book contain text and illustration, more interestingly, it contains audio. You can record a story. You record it both in read to me mode, which is the entire page is read aloud in a warm human voice, but also you record the individual words. What that means is we can provide, as we're doing now in pilots in places like Lesotho, we can provide somebody with a low-cost device like this, just a small smartphone, which contains books that will read themselves aloud to a beginning learner. So here, for example, is a book. It'll be very hard for you to see this, but hopefully you can hear it. This allows you to hand a book to a child.
Ben is in a new home.
And that book will read itself to the child. In fact, this phone will hold 16,000 of those texts. That's interesting. The ability to address the content shortage is interesting. But what's more interesting is the fact that we're doing this and supporting this in multiple languages, not just First Nation languages, but languages such as Ojibwe, which is a Native American language, which has recently moved from endangered to dying. And we actually have people preserving the cultural artifacts and the art and language of people in those nations using these tools. We can address the issue of access, but we can also provide something more than that. We can provide assessment. Because we know when a child or an adult has finished reading a book, something you can't do with a printed book. And we can address that individual learner's learning journey by pointing them to the next most appropriate book. We can assess and evaluate what they're doing as they progress without the requirement, which is often absent, of a physical classroom, a trained teacher, and an environment which supports it. All of these things are happening right now, led by the advice that we've had from the community. We find this really, really exciting. We want people to help us and continue to guide us as we look at other ways in which we can support that learning journey. But it's just an example of how technology can actually address the issue. If we go back to the classroom, well, I'm often asked, well, what will the classroom of the future look like? You know, and I've seen some really interesting classrooms. These are some pictures from a model school in Sweden. And you can see here, the school has been built around the child. So it supports introverts and extroverts. There are places for group learning, individual study. Obviously, you know, we'd probably all want to send our children somewhere like this. But actually, just to leave you on this final thought, if I think of what the classroom of the future will look like, it's not going to be something like this, you know, a space-age classroom. Because actually, the modern classroom as we know it is a modern invention. It only came about because during the industrial age, we had to get a large group of people together and teach them all the same thing. We knew what we wanted to teach them, and we knew the jobs they were going to do. That's no longer the case. We have no idea what companies children will work for when they leave school, because most of those companies don't exist. We do know the key skills they require. And in fact, the model I would suggest we look at is this one. Before the classroom, we had something called the apprenticeship. And if you think about what the apprenticeship is, that's personalised learning. You have an educator who can identify in real time the strengths and weaknesses and needs of an individual learner and make adjustments to the delivery of learning to suit that individual. This is the promise that technology offers, but it's a promise that cannot be restricted to children in the developed world only. Everything we've talked about, if we're truly serious about what we're trying to do, has to be available to children everywhere, both in the developed and the developing world. We believe that technology is beginning to make this possible. My plea to you would be, when we look at MOOCs, let's make sure that they are part of that future, rather than supporting the modalities of the past. Thank you.
Panelists have provided the information, raised some questions. Maybe it did not raise all the questions that you expected, but at the same time raised enough new questions for you to discuss. So I think what we are going to do is proceed by most probably getting a set of a number of, let's say, 3 questions, and they can be addressed to any one of the panelists. And basically, we'll start from there and kind of see how much interactivity we can create around what you heard, what you expect from the point of view of your participation in this conference, and also whether there is not anything in between, something that's missing, either from the presenters, what they presented. So I think I'll get probably closer to you, because there is too much light there and I can see you. So now I can see you. So who would have some, let's say, pressing questions that they really would like to start with? Go ahead. We have make the question, address the panelist, or say it's a general question.
This is a general question for each of you. Mr. Dieng mentioned that research was part of the strategic plan for his operation. It begs the question of each of you: what kinds of research at this stage in the development of MOOCs do you regard as most valuable in learning how to improve the delivery, or reduce the cost, or enhance the quality of the services?
I guess this is a general question. Who would like to answer that? Well, let me just probably take a quick answer on that. In what you saw in Duggan's presentation, there is a new notion called crowdsourcing. And basically what crowdsourcing is you create a site where people can go and in this case write some form of a reading passage or a textbook. And basically, correct me if I'm not right on track there. And what is happening is that, first of all, you elicitate, there is an elicitation of content, and you also have building from, the basis, because everybody can just go in and include part of their experience. This has been used in a variety of other, work when the work is huge and the funds are very limited. It has its own problems, and that's not here. Is that basically what you talked about?
What I could say is that one of the areas of key interest for us is actually around pedagogy. And if we look at what MOOCs are and are not, we have a concern, and I'll be honest about it. We already know that there's a huge dropout rate from MOOCs, particularly running in the US. A lot of students just don't finish the course, and there's a big issue about accreditation. Our biggest concern is not that, it's the passive nature of a lot of MOOCs at the moment. The way in which they may or may not be supporting outdated modalities. There was a report published by the Protest Panel for Africa around 4 years ago, which spoke about a twin crisis in Africa. On the first side, there's base literacy. The other side is the absence of ICT skills. We know that MOOCs can be really helpful in building those skills, but again, we don't want to prepare people for the past. You know, just to speak to a comment that was made earlier, and I think it's really important. We know that there's major issues in terms of access. We know there's major issues in terms of the price of devices. But those things are going to go away. The reality is, if you don't believe that every child on the planet is going to have some form of low-cost mobile learning device and a permanent internet access within the next 20 years, then you're deluding yourself, because the speed of change is faster than that. That's a conservative estimate. If you look at the growth of the smartphone, even in areas of sub-Saharan Africa, we know that that is getting cheaper and cheaper and more ubiquitous. So what we've got to do is build for that, build for the future, not build for the past.
Okay, yeah, a question? So here, as you see, the technology itself is not the major cost.
Yeah.
The technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, and is more and more spread out. But basically, I think we really have to focus more on the other challenges like pedagogy, like teachers and all that.
Yeah, so it's adding up to the pedagogy question, issue. I'm working at the World Bank, and then I looked at the teachers who don't really have incentive to teach, and their salary is low. But if the government cannot provide any financial incentives, but is there any way that we could provide incentive with the technology to the teachers to be passionate about teaching and etc. And then how do you think will be the good teacher education through using technologies?
Okay, I think this is a question to everybody. Yeah. So anybody who would like also to answer at the same time, please raise your hand. So Mr. Khan?
I think most people recognize that there is a disconnect between the people who are supposed to be educated and the needs of the society. Basically, two reasons. One, that education has been largely irrelevant to the needs of the people. Secondly, that it is not matched with what is required in the employment market. I think in my own country, they're talking about 500 million people need to be given skill upgrades. 500 million in 10, 15 years or so. That's the government of India, always unrealistic. But the fact is that there are in hundreds of millions who need to be. Can technology really teach the knowledge and particularly skills by itself without any interface with hands-on practical experience? Is it really, in the next 20 years, do you see the technology doing it by itself?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. My name is Coordonnateur, International Council for Open and Distance Education, and thank you for 3 thought-provoking presentations. And what made me raise my hand was the comment from the last presenter, which is interesting, and I agree with the pace of technology. However, in that period you mentioned, 20 years from now, the number of higher educated persons in the world will more than double. What about that? The number of need for teachers will almost triple. What about them? You see, we have a huge thing in front of us, and it's not like in 10 or 15 years. It's now, it has to be solved with the means we have. This is not about science fiction, it is about meeting the demands. Then, I think it was a very good issue that was presented now on student success. And if you combine those presentations, it was student success in life, student success with employment, and student success in education. So what about that? I like the comment on research. So what do we know about these 3 successes? Thank you.
Okay. Anybody? I think I saw a hand right there. Yes. Can you come and talk together? We need 2 people here because we have people on both sides. So there's a gentleman there.
Thank you.
I just want to say one thing as far as some of the comments that have been made here so far. I do believe, I'm fascinated by this idea that kids can teach themselves reading through a mobile device. I think that without facilitators, i.e. teachers, we are not going to see any of this. And I think we have to keep those teachers in the loop. And I think likewise what has come up in this conference several times now is that parents are part of the solution as well.
And if I could just maybe, sorry, elaborate on that because, oh, my apologies. Sorry, just, Papa, do you want to go first?
It's okay.
So I wanted to make just a clarification, and I know this is something often people feel. We are not suggesting technology replaces a teacher. Far from it. Technology is only useful when it enhances and extends the reach of the teacher. And we're not suggesting that devices will replace good teachers in schools. It has to be a both. And the reality is, as it was said, this is a crisis happening now. We have 1.7 million too few primary school teachers now to meet UNESCO's goals for universal primary education. It's going to take years. In the meantime, we've got to look at ways in which we can at least shore up the dam and help to address the issue so that we don't lose a generation while we wait for that next improvement, which we know will come in terms of the levels of professional development.
I want to talk about 2 points. The first one is about the incentive of teachers that person from World Bank talk about. This incentive of teachers is deeper than the technology matter, because World Bank and many countries to reach education for all made initiative is to enroll teachers without training in order to pay them less. And when it's done, there is no increase of salary of teachers, and the teachers globally are poor. And the image of teacher changed, because in the past the teacher was perceived as in the middle class, but now they are poor. It's a big problem in Africa, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. I want to add this. But about the technology in the training, what we see in our experience is if you use this technology in a training program, even is not crucial for the training, you have an incentive. For example, in IFADEM, we set up multimedia centers in order to train teachers 3 days. They don't get skills, but we see that it increases the incentive. Everyone wants to participate in order to get that training. And after that, they continue on the technology. The other point I want to add is about teaching and technology. In the history, when the post was created, there was correspondent education by distance education using the post. And even when the TV was created, we have education using TV, internet also, because education is using the technology he found. But in this case, the usage of the technology is, is influencing also the education. It's the connectivity model what Stefan does talk about. We think that the question, if you want to use, yes, my point is, the question, if you can learn only with technology, is yes and no.
Okay, so I think
for me.
Because if it's yes or no, let's see. We have, I think, yeah, gentlemen.
Thank you. If I can pick up that theme about the pedagogy and the technology, because in John Bethway, University of Cambridge, by the way, Stephen's illustration of the young people working in groups and working across national borders made me immediately think of the game which was very big in the UK, 20 Questions. Maybe it was a worldwide game, wasn't it? but Jerome Bruegel made the point that if you really develop what is a very high level skill in 20 questions, I don't think that was necessarily exemplified in the video, but the thing is that a very, very skilled person using 20 questions can get almost anything at all that you may be thinking of. So for example, I may be thinking of the filling that I had in my sandwich at lunchtime, and I'm not going to tell you anything, but you've got 20 questions to find out what I'm thinking about. And the strategy of progressive reduction, so you start with big broad questions and you refine and you refine and you refine until you get it. You can almost always get the answer in 20 questions. Now that is a very high level pedagogic skill, and I think the technology then supports that in respect of children talking to one another across national borders, but with that strategy that they have learned, and I think that's an incredibly powerful illustration.
In a way, what we saw there is how games can be used for some aspects of education. We started, if you see, the notion that the MOOCs are probably adequate when it comes to teacher training. And I don't know whether there is a consensus about it. The adequacy seems to be big numbers of teachers needed, and therefore the need for quality training. And it seems that MOOCs answer it. I'd like some of you to respond to that. In the meantime, we have one participant from there, and then you'll be next.
My comment is regarding the issue of dropout rates, because I believe the discussion should not be around the fact that there are high dropout rates. It should be around the reasons behind having the dropout rates. The paradigm of MOOCs is mainly democratizing education, and when we're dealing with adult learners, like most of the MOOCs do, we have to agree that it's a democratized process. So I choose when to learn and how to learn it. So it could be the reason for me to drop out the course could be the fact that I don't have the time. I'll make it another. I'll actually make it another timing. I take the course later. It could be that I already took the content that I need, and I think my friend there from Uni would share the same opinion, because at the end of the day, it's a democratic process. I'm pretty sure that if you ask a lot of students in the traditional classrooms whether you want to drop out or not and make it as democratic, I'm 100% sure that most of them will not want to continue their classrooms. So that's the point. The reasons behind it, whether it's the quality of content or other logistical or timely reasons, that's where the discussion should be.
Okay, so here you're adding another component, which is the notion of democratic MOOCs. I would just let the audience respond to that, because in a way that's another political issue that relates to probably freedom of access to some content. But basically, for our interest, I think, in the conference is, apart from a general interest like the one you're expressing, an interest in what makes us move closer to answering the needs of education. And don't forget that for the moment we talked about post-secondary, tertiary, but I think that Sandra opened the way to show that what's probably also needed is education for young learners. And I think she is correct. I think that young learners are going to be the basis from which the tertiary people are going to be there, and in the developing world their number is huge, and those who are put out of the whole system is also huge. So in a way, this is really a big issue, and I think we probably will get to it little by little. Next here.
Hello. So in the ideal scenario where rigorous impact assessment actually does identify best MOOC practices around the world for different socioeconomic strata, different cultures, etc., how do you reconcile, on the one hand, the necessity for free, open access to reach the so-called bottom of the pyramid, the maximum number of individuals around the world, and on the other hand, having financial sustainability, a business model that allows MOOCs, especially being so resource intensive to produce, not depending on philanthropic contributions and financial foreign aid, etc.
I think you've asked a really interesting and really important question. This notion of sustainability is absolutely key. So, for example, some of the tools we displayed for you are not ways for people to be able to consume more content. That's not the point. The point is to allow people to create their own content, to create content in local language, because we know in the issues of literacy it's so much harder to learn basic literacy in any language other than your mother tongue. To create content which is relevant to your local culture, which speaks to you and to your children and to your community. But also to do so in such a way that you can, by creating the content, create more content. So for example, the tools we showed you, the Chekhov tools, anybody can create a book. Every book is reviewed before it's published in 3 forms. It's published as an app, as I showed you, but it's also published as a print resource, which can be cheaply printed on demand. But in every instance, the creator can either give it away or sell it. So part of the model there is supporting this with a marketplace which allows local communities to build content, have it assessed, integrate it into a rigorous evaluation process, but also be rewarded for doing so, so that can in turn generate more content, because we can't fix those problems and we shouldn't try to. We have to equip communities to fix their own problems.
Maybe a quick question here. When you talk about generation of content by the community, there must be a cost somewhere. How would you cover the cost?
So what we're doing at the moment is we're supporting creation of content both online and offline. So I talked to you about the cloud service. Anybody can go to that. That's free. We pay for that. We support the hosting of that. We allow people to publish their stories as print and apps. We pay for that. We support that infrastructure. If they sell those stories, the money goes back to that community or that individual author. We're happy to support that. You know, Microsoft is a commercial company, and obviously, you know, the way I sell that internally is that if more people are using devices, that has to be good for the technology companies in the long run. But in terms of being able to build a sustainable model outside of that, really it's about harnessing the creativity. We've got to get away from this notion that creativity is something we bring to communities. There's every bit as much creativity in the smallest village I visited in Lesotho as there is down the road here.
Thank you.
Hi there, thank you so much for everything you guys have had to say, and particularly those last comments. So Meg Evans, I'm from Udemy. And on that similar idea of Udemy as a platform in which anyone can create a MOOC, right? So it's really simple to put together an online course. And to someone's question about business model, we kind of operate on the same principle that if you create a course, you can offer it for free or you can decide to charge for it. It's your intellectual property. And so what I think is interesting in the same kind of question of, we talk about this paradigm from like top universities in America delivering content to rural villages, right? But also this question of what is there to learn from these rural villages too, right? So we just had someone create a MOOC from Michoacan, from the state, you know, south of Mexico City, on this particular type of indigenous art that they didn't want to lose to future generations, right? So I think we should all be thinking about how can we empower bottom-up creation, right? Rather than having this conversation from the top-down perspective. And part of that is incentivizing teachers, right? And is allowing them to charge for that content when you think about how do we connect employability, you know, how do we connect school and skills to employability? So I just kind of wanted to throw that perspective in there. And, you know, we have probably 40 or 50, I just pulled the numbers, courses created in South Africa, right? So how do we empower local folks around the world to say you have the same kind of experts exist everywhere? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of how do we scale that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please. It's okay.
Thank you. I am Varghese I am the Director of Center for Policy Research in Higher Education, New Delhi. You know, thank you very much for the presentations. I have one concern, and the concern is the following. The brick and mortar system of higher education always caters to those who are educationally advantaged groups. Now, one of the advantages of MOOCs, since the selection criteria and entry points are rather free, is that barrier that the brick and mortar system creates is taken away by the MOOCs. But when we come to the success rates or retention rates, opposite of dropout rates, we find it is in single digits. Secondly, when we compare those who are enrolled, many of them are for second degrees, not for the first degrees, which preempts or which conflicts with the basic tenets of extending or democratizing education or massifying higher education through MOOCs. So from that point of view, MOOCs also indirectly tries to restrict the base of higher education rather than massifying higher education. Thank you.
Okay, any answers from the panel? Any other questions? I think we're getting close. Okay, please.
Mine is rather a contribution to someone who asked about a grassroots movement on open education. Just want to say that we have the OCWC, the Open Courseware Consortium, just in their name now to Open Education Consortium. And there is a global meeting in 2 weeks in Slovenia. You can Google that and see that it's a large community going from everywhere in the world, and we are participating actively. Thank you.
Okay, probably one or two last questions. There's one here.
I guess I don't need a microphone. So I noticed that we got through a very interesting conversation about technology and pedagogy, but haven't talked about copyright regimes and content as its own infrastructure to support learning. And I'm interested if the panel has any comments on how open licensing specifically can help support localized learning, because open licensing allows local communities to translate and adapt content to the local context rather than creating their own. Can we find ways to take the existing content and use it as an infrastructure to support local work?
Well, thank you very much. I think that on your behalf and on mine, I'd like to thank the panelists for their contribution to today's plenary session. I think this has been just the beginning of interaction. I don't think that it will be the end. You have 2 more days to really discuss these issues, get back to them, and I'm sure that the organizers will make sure to group you together in smaller groups so that you become